his keynote speech at the opening of our conference right now. But for those of you who were late or didn't do that, let me just very, very warmly welcome Christian. He is many things. I'm not sure what's the best way to introduce him. So maybe I just introduce Christian by what he's passionate about. And that is this idea that the economy shouldn't just serve the bottom line of companies, but the common good. And so I think the best way to describe you is you're a writer, a thinker, an activist, and you try to convince us that the right way forward is indeed to think about the economy for the common good. And I absolutely agree. I found your keynote fascinating. But had a little question I actually really wanted to ask, but I didn't do that. I was sitting
Maybe,
in the room where we live streamed that, and my question was, given the urgency that many people focus on, and this idea that we have maybe I don't know 6 years. There's a clock actually ticking down. I think this is something below 7 years. Some people say
mhm.
a decade. I was always thinking that changing people's minds and changing how economy is taught in universities is really the long game. So I was just thinking in how far this change that you're advocating, how that can happen within a generation, quicker, longer. That's something
Mhm.
I would like to know. But of course, Christian, you're here to talk to us, and it's actually your show. So I'm super happy that you're here. Very excited. Also, welcome again to all the people who are part of this, and just want to wish you a really inspiring session with Christian. The floor is yours, and again, it's a great pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Philip, for introducing me so nicely. And of course, first and foremost, I would love to answer your question or to start a discussion already. I see three parts or three possibilities how we could accelerate change. The first one is to establish a green dictator. The problem with the green dictator is that you never know what he will do. So you can um, build a dictatorship, but then it's not guaranteed and assured that the dictator will stabilize the global climate. He could do the opposite. So that's why I'm not a friend of this version. Second version is to raise our awareness and our empathy towards global ecosystems, to improve our level of education. That's one of our proposed strategies. That's the way we're doing. Yeah, and what are the alternatives? We could vote still political parties hoping that they will accelerate systemic change. Of course, that's not a contradiction. But maybe I pass the question over to the audience, and maybe the best answer comes from the students. And yes, I of course have brought another input, but I already have given an input. So before um, giving another input, which would be about diving a little bit deeper into economic science and its implication in the big change, or in its role hindering big change. I'm afraid that's my analysis of current economics, of new classical economics, of course. Um, yeah, I would like to ask you if maybe there are already some bigger questions remaining from the panel discussion or my first input, and I would prefer to answer them first, or to do a little discussion first. And I can look into the chat, and maybe Philip, you help me moderating. If you're
Yes, I
still
can
here.
definitely do that. So if there are questions in the chat, for those of you who have been at this afternoon's panel and have questions about what Christian was saying there, maybe really a good way to start out. So please don't be shy. You can also raise the blue hand, raise the real hand, also possible, or put it in the chat, and I will just tell Christian what your questions are.
Right now, I don't see any question yet. If this stays like this, I would understand the answer is going forward with my second input, which is no problem at all. I'll wait a few more seconds, and I think I'm getting already prepared for showing my slides and starting with the second input. Yes, I will do that. The title of this second input is the title of my recent book in German. It has an English main title, This is Not Economy, an English subtitle, A Call for Revolution in Economics or Economic Science. And I already explained what it means on the panel. So I start right away, repeating a little bit that we are facing a whole landscape of crises. Most threatening ones are the ecological crisis, and majorities of the citizens in virtually all countries are asking for systemic change. So great transformation is supported by the people, and there are offers. There are diverse proposals how we could transform the economy, the economic system, thanks to economic policy. And my proposal of an economy for the common good, actually ours, because we are 5,000 volunteers in some 35 countries that are striving for this systemic change in our movement only. And I thought that we would, maybe this description, we are a holistic, we chose a holistic approach, which means we do have a theory of change. We do have an alternative theoretical model, which is composed by 20 cornerstones. We are at the same time a highly participatory movement, consisting not only of individuals, but also companies, cities, and more universities, because there is not only neoclassical economics, there are many heterodox and pluralistic approaches, and it's not black and white. So many professors have a neoclassical education, but now open up towards diverse approaches. And the third dimension of our movement is the bottom-up democracy. I already mentioned the citizen assemblies in the panel discussion, and our idea that was born before, actually, we called it still democratic conventions. And democratic convention would have the power to define 10 to, let's say, 20 cornerstones of the legal framework for the economy or for the monetary and financial system or for the trade order directly by the people. So they would give kind of a constitutional mandate for parliaments and governments, and on that foundation, parliaments and governments could decide on the details thanks to laws and resolutions, which is today their task, but they would not be able any longer to write the constitutions, because the constitutions would lie in the competence of the people, of the citizens. That would be the big change in democracy, which is our answer to the analysis of post-democracy by Colin Crouch, the British political scientist, who says that formally our democracies are sound and functional. But if you look at the output, at the laws that are being decided by parliaments and governments, they do not represent any longer the majority of the citizens. That's the post-democracy crisis, one of the many crises in our landscape. And the answer to that post-democracy analysis is a sovereign democracy, we call that, and I will explain a little bit later why I call it sovereign democracy. Well, this is our nice and fancy offer to the society. It's warmly welcomed by the society in general. People are joining, companies are joining, municipalities and cities are joining. City of Amsterdam has started to support our movement, and many scientists are joining. We have created a scientific community of almost 500 scholars already. We created a chair even, Economy for the Common Good at the University of Valencia. But the typical reaction from mainstream economic science, which I define as neoclassical economics, is different. It's cool, or even rejecting. And well, this is something what is maybe not even worth talking about, but why I do talk about it is the reasons and the arguments they give. They are really surprising and they're worth a closer look. And then I hope we can understand neoclassical economics better and understand as a consequence why are they part of the problem and not of the solution, rather part of the problem than of the solution, and what could be a different approach to economic science. Yeah, here you see that a very prominent criticism of the economy for the common good is that it's a normative approach. And I'm a social scientist. I studied, amongst others, political science, sociology, and psychology. And I learned that all social sciences are by nature normative sciences in the meaning that there is no value-free science. So although scientists try to be as objective and as value-free as possible, unavoidably they still involve value judgments, and there is no such thing as a value-free science. And especially every idea of the economy is always normative. So it's an illusion and it's a myth, and it's misguiding that you can have an idea of the economy which is not normative. But they almost use this attribute of normative as a weapon, at least as a criteria of distinction from their non-normative approach to the economy and to the object of research. And that's important because they consider themselves as scientists, as objective, positivistic scientists, whereas others who advocate a sustainable economy, a common good economy, or a solidary economy, they're by definition not scientific and not objective because they are normative and because they base their proposal on values. And I don't deny that. I don't answer that's not the case. I say, of course that's the case. That's not only the case, that's our strongest point. We make the values on which we make our proposal transparent because it's unavoidable that any idea of the economy is based on values, and our values are fundamental values of democratic constitutions, and this makes our proposal so strong. That was my answer, but a little bit irritated by that kind of distinction between a normative and a non-normative science. I digged a little bit deeper and I discovered that neoclassical economics considered themselves rather natural scientists than social scientists. And that was really surprising to me because it was totally clear that economics is a 100% fully social science and not a natural science. And I found quotations over quotations and statements over statements that not only singular and some, let's say, minoritarian neoclassical economics considered themselves rather natural scientists, but this is the point here. In the most widely used economics introductory textbooks, they make a strong case for economics being a natural science. Paul Samuelson was the most successful textbook author for decades, and he really imprinted the minds of a whole generation of economists. And now his successor, Gregory Mankiw, both from the United States, is still doing the same. Now in the last years, Gregory Mankiw is yielding a little bit, but in the version from 2016, which I read, he is still writing what you see on the slide. And this is really astonishing. This is really surprising. Only if you understand economic science as a natural science, then it makes sense that you consider markets as natural phenomenon and not as social constructions. And this really makes a big difference Because if you consider markets, first and foremost markets, but also property and distribution and money as natural phenomenon, and especially markets, then you can't do anything about them. You can just you can just intervene in this natural order and try to change it, but probably you will only make it less efficient. And they start their view from markets with metaphors, which are very telling. Market laws. Everybody has heard this term, although not having studied economics. And if we hear the term market laws, do we think of laws that have been democratically decided by politicians? Of course we don't. We think at least unconsciously of natural laws, which are not changeable, to which there is no alternative. And this is exactly the political outcome of this thinking, that politicians, which take over this paradigm, they all of a sudden say there is no alternative to a specific way of doing economic policy. It's a famous saying of Margaret Thatcher. Her mastermind was Friedrich August von Hayek. And at the same time, it was Ronald Reagan in the United States. And the mastermind behind was Milton Friedman. And these two were kind of the founders of the society of market radical thinking, thinkers that tried to describe markets as natural phenomenon, which you only can describe and understand. You can research them and understand them, but you cannot design them and change them. It's highly important because it decides on the question if markets are part of democratic decision making or not. Because we're not making a democratic decision if the climate should change or not. We can only make the decision if we contribute to climate change or not, and if we adapt to climate change or not. Because climate is truly a natural phenomenon, and here it's correct, but markets are not. Markets are man-made 100%, and we can design them in one way or another, or not even use them at all. That's our free choice. But if economic science presents markets as natural phenomenon, which are a mechanism which tends to natural equilibrium between supply and demand, which obeys laws, which are natural laws, then all you can do is to try to understand these markets. And I love especially this quotation from a German economist. Markets in a way are out-researched. So there's nothing more to understand about markets. And that's very curious because it's another way to say this is the end of history. We have understood everything in economic science, and now we can go forever with our level of knowledge and remain the positive economic cycle forever, which actually was one of the dominant ideas right before 2008 when everything broke down. I already analyzed in my first presentation that although focusing on the general equilibrium theory between supply and demand, all other more relevant equilibria are lost and are not even predicted, although prediction should be your first and foremost virtue if you have fully understood and out-researched markets. But markets had not been understood at all by none of these neoclassical economics. That's why really nobody noticed the coming of the 2008 crisis. So something is wrong about this paradigm. They don't even understand markets according to their own conception of markets. Other scientists predicted the crisis. I found papers of dozens of economists who had predicted the crisis, but who did not adhere to the neoclassical school of economics, and who were completely ignored by neoclassical economics. And my fear is that that what will happen now, although including finally banks and financial markets and instability of financial markets in mathematical models of analyzing and predicting the economy, economists will overlook other factors which are as relevant as banks, for instance. If you haven't got it, banks were not included in the mainstream models of economic analysis and prediction. For instance, the DSGE models, they were just considered as irrelevant, and that's why that was part of the reason why mainstream economists did not predict the financial crisis. And I made a modest question to a leading economist of the European Commission in a discussion in the European Parliament. Is biodiversity included in your models? And he looked at me like a stranger and said, no, they're not. And I asked, why not? And his answer was a little bit helpless. He said, well, not everything can be included in a model of economic analysis and prediction. And that was the end of the discussion. And the question remaining in the air is biodiversity relevant to economic analysis or not? And my point is, it's absolutely relevant. It's key. But as long as economics does not include biodiversity in its theory, in its analysis, and its models of prediction, and it's, of course, in its concept of welfare and the common good and economic success, then this science will keep failing. Okay, I made that point already. I described how we would embed economic activities into its broader contexts. As a consequence, the common good should be, yes, it should be the normative goal of the economy rather than money. And here is an interesting addition to what I said in my first input. Economy and economics stems from oikonomia, and I already said that oikos is the house, and nomos are the moral rules thanks to which we manage the house in order to achieve a goal, a normative goal, which is the well-being of all household members. But now I want to draw your attention to nomos. Nomos are the moral rules. So by definition, by the proper term of oikonomia, economics is a moral science and not a value-free science. If the rules thanks to which we manage the house were natural laws, then the proper Greek term would be oikos logos, ecology, which exists and which is a natural science justifiedly, because the ecology is the science of, here it's correct, researching and understanding the laws of nature, of ecosystems. Here it's totally correct, but economy is looking at different rules, at man-made rules, at social laws. And I think that's so fundamental that it should be part of the introduction into economic science in any study that has to do with economics. And I call these PCs, or points of critique, by the way, a threefold radical amnesia in economic science, which is a quasi or a pseudo natural science, because it's not, it's a social science. But it even if it believes that it is a natural science, this helps to explain these threefold amnesia. First, origin. We don't have to go back as far as Aristotle. The godfather of economics is Adam Smith. He's considered as the originator of this science, and he was not an economist by his education. Of course, he was a philosopher, and worse, he was a moral philosopher. And I think that's a big forgetting that the founder of economic science was a moral philosopher. And today, if sometimes if students ask in their classes, what about ethical questions? Not rarely. The answer was, well, if you're interested in ethics, please go and study philosophy. And that's a painful answer, because there is at least a fraction of neoclassical economists who think that ethical questions don't have a place in the economic education and studies of economics. Of course, it's not a black and white. I emphasize again, there is business ethics is part of many studies, but in Germany, less than 1% of the curricula of economic studies, less than 1%. I think that's not doing fairness to Adam Smith. Keynes, another good example. Economics is essentially moral science. I think he read Aristotle and he understood well the term of oikonomia, but tried to find out about Keynes in recent textbooks. If he appears, he appears decreasingly, and for sure you will not find this quotation in any widespread economic textbook. The amnesia too, I just talked about, and the third one is the goal. That's why I emphasize that Aristotle had crystal clear that the goal of oikonomia is the well-being of all members of the household, the common good. That was totally clear, even to Adam Smith. That was still clear, and only with the rise of neoclassical economics from 1870 on, Leon Walras, Karl Menger, Wilfrido Pareto, and others, they started to focus only on analyzing, understanding, and researching. And there is no other goal than understanding what's going on. But of course, nature has no goal. That could be the answer from a neoclassical standpoint. And that's why there is you will not find neither a clear definition of economy nor of economics. And to be short, I offer a definition of economic science that could be useful nowadays and for the 25th century. It could be the science of the satisfaction of needs, of maybe basic human needs of living and future generations, respecting democratic values, and within the ecological boundaries of the planet. That's, of course, one of many possible definitions, but look what you will find in your study. And the most current one I remember is the efficient management of scarce resources. And if economics is the science of the efficient management of scarce resources, what's the goal? Well, there might be the goal of efficiency, but efficiency in what terms? Ecological efficiency, capitalistic efficiency. So it remains unclear, and that's not scientific. That's not seriously scientific. Yes. Maybe I go further. Yes, this is now maybe the my most important point. Although claiming to be value-free, neoclassical economics is, of course, unavoidably already argued, a value system. Just it doesn't make it transparent, and this makes things worse. Because if you one say you're value-free, second you're aggressing others who are more transparent than you, and third hide your own values, what could you say about something like that? And what do I mean? I found scientific research results. If there are values transported and propagated by neoclassical economic textbooks? And if yes, which values are these? And the most interesting articles I found summed up that the value system transported and propagated by neoclassical economic introductory textbooks is a value system composed by utility maximization, pursuit of financial goals, materialism, competition orientation, and unlimited growth. And to be short, that's a value system. But 2 points of observation. First, these values, if people try to live according to these values, there is scientific evidence that these values make people both less free and less happy. There's scientific evidence on that. So now we should, I could just start to cry. Then why are these values propagated if people become less happy and less free if they try to live according to these values? And worse, these values, these 5 values, you will not find a single value of them in any democratic constitution. They contradict democratic constitutions rather, because democratic constitutions, as I showed, they support the common good, and fundamental values of democracies are, by contrast, human dignity, solidarity, justice, sustainability, and democratic participation and transparency. So something completely different from the value system that is propagated in textbooks. And this is why we had to develop the economy for the common good kind of against the spirit of the mainstream economic science, of course, in line with heterodox approaches. There is ecological economics, there is environmental economics, there is feminist economics, there is institutional economics, but they're all pushed to the side, and they only play a minor role in economic science in general, and especially in economic education. So my main criticism is against economic education. And I already showed you how the common good balance sheet works and what's our proposal to shift from this neoclassical or capitalistic value system to a democratic value system. That's our proposal. Find back to the values of oikonomia. Very interestingly, two other values of the original oikonomia were sufficiency, so explicitly not eternal growth, but moderation and sufficiency. And the other one was even independence from markets, but that would go too far, and I led with that. Maybe I bring this example because this was not in my input. This is one of my favorite examples. One of the least controversial theoretical elements of neoclassical economics is trade theory. So the theory on global trade. And that's so uncontroversial that economists managed to convince politicians to found a World Trade Organization outside the United Nations system. So the World Trade Organization is not part of the UN system. And the reason is that trade law does not have to take into consideration existing international law, from human rights to labor rights to climate protection to environmental protection agreements to cultural diversity and others. All these exist and have been decided decades ago. And the World Trade Organization was only founded in 1995, and its binding and hard international law does not need to relate legally to existing international law. And where it relates to is trade theory of neoclassical economics. And the benefits of this reasoning and this policy is argued today. You can look it up today on the website of the World Trade Organization like this. Suppose country A is better than country B at making automobiles, and country B is better than country A at making bread. it is obvious, and now academics, and of course they mean economists, would say trivial, that both would benefit if A is specialized in automobiles, and B in bread, and they traded their products. And then they qualify this explanation as the single most powerful insight into economics. That's today on the website of the World Trade Organization. And I'm not an economist by formation. I did not study economics. So for me, that's not self-understanding. This is new and interesting, and I'm curious to understand what they propose. But now I invite this text to sink into my heart. And what do I feel? I feel that it's totally insane to propose that, for instance, France should only make bread and close its car industry, and Germany, just to give an example, close all its bakeries in order to produce a little bit more efficiently more cars and sell the cars to France and buy bread from France. And sorry to say, I am losing my non-violent communication style, because this is between absurd and insane. It's insane. That's what my heart is telling me. And I'm without words. And why should this be the most powerful insight into economics? To eradicate bakeries all from Germany? That's insane. That's a war against common sense. And I think that's exactly the problem. Neoclassical economics is not compatible with common sense. It's a fiction, it's an abstraction according to mathematical equations, which has nothing to do with life, which has nothing to do with meaning, which has nothing to do with democratical values and long-term ethics, which has nothing to do with wisdom. Yeah, you call that troublesome. That's an interesting term. You call knowledge, because this is presented as knowledge, that changes not only your mind, but that changes your values. Economic science is not meant to change the values, the ethical attitudes of students. That's not the mandate for and the role of economic education. But if you take this as valuable knowledge and powerful insights, then you change your value system. And this is considered as troublesome knowledge. And this is what has happened over the past decades in economic mainstream education. Now, a good news, I'm not an economist, but I have been teaching at 8 universities so far. And I've been teaching for 10 years at Vienna University of Economics and Business. And I had the opportunity to introduce my ideas, economy for the common good, ethical world trade. And I like to do votings according to a mechanism of, or a procedure of decision-making, which is by far more convincing than the simple majority principle. The simple majority principle is that there is only one proposal on the table. Shall we join the World Trade Organization or not? Or shall we stay outside? And then, of course, there's a huge campaign for joining, and then a country usually joins. But there are no alternatives on the table. And this would make democracy by far more effective if there were alternatives on the table. And the procedure that I'm now a fan of is called systemic consensus. And you can lay 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 proposals on the table, and you vote on all proposals. But instead of voting the hooray and the affirmation, you vote the resistance against every proposal, because every proposal will enforce a specific regulation on you and will take away some of your freedom. This is the nature of every law. Every law takes away some of our freedom, but in change, it is supposed that it gives us systemically more freedom back than it takes from us, or it prevents us from a bigger loss of freedom than it takes from us. And that's why this method of decision making is more intelligent in my view. And the results are the votes of resistance. And the winner is, of course, that proposal that generates or provokes the least resistance. And you see that the winner was clearly ethical world trade as an alternative to these both extremes, to capitalism and socialism, to free trade, opening borders totally and closing borders totally, protectionism. And that was really surprising to me, because I only had 2 hours to talk to students who had learned for years that free trade is an uncontroversially the only theory in town. There is no other alternative. As Paul Samuelson said, literally, if we needed a new trade theory different from free trade theory, I would create it on my own. But we don't need it. That's the mindset of an economist. That's gooseskin making, because he can have his preference of how trade policy should regulate trade, but he should never say that we don't need a better alternative. Why we always need a better alternative to the existing state of the art. So the mindset is highly anti-democratic, and it comes out of a mindset of a natural scientist who thinks that he has understood nature best, and no one has understood nature better than himself. Only such a person can, and such a person can think like this. And he writes about the way of thinking like an economist. And these persons were the consultants of politicians who then thought, well, there is no alternative. Then we only have the choice to go for free trade and to join the World Trade Organization. And then they never would have the idea to lay several proposals, and a 4th one and a 5th one, and maybe even a 6th and a 7th one on the table, and then let people choose. That would be a better democracy. And let's take a look at the time. Maybe a last example. Yes, and I explain what sovereign democracy means literally. Sovereign comes from Latin, the highest instance. And according to democracy theory, the highest instance in democracy are the people by definition, not the parliament, not the government. These are the representatives of the people, and the people vote their representatives. And that's fine. But the final word should always lie in the hands of the people, of the highest instance. That's my understanding of democracy. That's why I propose that the constitutions should be written by the people, and constitutions then regulate the rights and the powers of parliament, government, and other democratic powers. That would be the right order in my understanding of democracy. And then people could, only if governments and parliaments don't limit inequality, although people wish inequality to be limited. I take the survey from the Financial Times, which found out that from China to Europe to the US, between 75 and 87% of the citizens of every country considers inequality as too high, as excessive at the moment. The logical consequence would be, in my thinking, ask the people where to limit inequality. In income, in property, in inheritages, and in the size of companies. And I developed a game which I have played with 50,000 people in 25 countries so far. And I don't make any proposal. I only ask them, where would you limit inequality? Let's start with income, between the highest incomes and the lowest incomes. And then people make, in both examples, you see they don't make 3 or 5 proposals. They make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 proposals, or even more, but no problem. We vote on all proposals that come from the people. In the left columns, you see the maximum ratio between the highest and the lowest incomes. So 4 means maximum 4 times the highest incomes in relation to lowest incomes. 1,000 means highest incomes can be 1,000 times higher than the lowest incomes. And then we vote we measure resistance. And you see that the lowest resistance in the left example is with factor 10, 31 resistance votes. And in the right example, it's factor 5 with 15 resistance votes. And the outcome can be pictured as a curve, as a valley curve. And at the bottom of the curve is the proposal with which provokes the least resistance, factor 5 or factor 10. And proposals of both of a lower inequality and of a higher inequality meet higher resistance. The socialist, here's the socialist extreme, meets extremely high resistance, and the capitalistic extreme meets equally extremely high resistance. And the lowest resistance is somewhere in between. Here, the winners are factor 5 or factor 10. And now we compare to the results for which our parliaments are responsible. And you see that there is a gap for which we almost have no name. It's astronomic, the gap. And this is one last example for post-democracy. Parliaments decide things differently than people would decide them, but people don't have the power. And neoclassical economists would say, let markets decide. And my alternative proposal is no, this has to be a decision of the sovereign body, which is the totality of all citizens of a country. And they should consciously and democratically decide which is the level of inequality they prefer most, which means against which they have the least resistance. In textbooks, you don't find these kinds of proposals. I bring you this, it's a second last example, and then I bring a last one. Of course, to implement such a proposal, you would have to raise income tax to almost 100% when inequality reaches a ceiling of 10 times the minimum wage. This would be a radically progressive tax system. Helverian, one of the most successful textbook authors, he does not even discuss these proposals. He just says nobody would support such a radical reform of the tax system. That's interesting because I'm one. There are persons in the US that do support such a radical reform of the tax system. And most importantly, it was the case for decades in the history of the United States. And about that, a textbook of economics should simply inform. And the reason why the top rate of the income tax in the United States was for almost 30 years above 90%, unimaginable today, was to limit inequality and to keep inequality in a moderate corridor. That was the goal behind. And you may like it or not, but as a serious scientist and textbook author, you should inform about these facts in economic education. And my very last one, no, I don't think I do a last one because time has progressed. So I stop here and maybe I get back to my last example according to your questions. So thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to discuss now. So I look at the chat, I see the link to the World Trade Organization website has been posted. I don't know if anybody else is going to co-moderate.
I'm sorry, I just had a little problem. Thank you, Christian, for the presentation. I see there are already lots of questions. So I think this was highly interesting, provocative, but really also, I think, striking a chord with some of the things we have discussed today. Facing not only a climate emergency, but various emergencies and various crises. I think a discussion about how we organize one of the most important tools we have, that's the way we run our economy, I think is a really crucial one. And so I really enjoyed that. Thanks so much. Actually, right in the beginning of your talk, I went downstairs to get something to eat because I was hungry, and my wife gave me a plate. Hey, Leute, ich bin am Telefon. Sorry. And she gave me a plate, and sorry, my kids are a bit wild today. Always, actually.
Nice.
And I was just thinking about this is one of the transactions that is not regulated by the market, right? So my wife didn't give me the plate because there was any kind of market interaction between the two of us, and we often forget how much of social life and of human life is actually not part of a market, but we have fetishized the market to a degree that is really interesting. So I was reminded of that, and I think that's a great insight. There are, of course, lots of questions, and I think we will not be able to address all of them. But I want to just pick some, and maybe. Okay, sorry guys, I really need some quiet here. Anna, can I get some quiet, please? Thank you, Anna. Maybe you can also just send your questions to Christian.
Otherwise, I can take over.
It's all under control. Maybe
It's
you can
that
also
time of
send
the
the
evening.
Yes, you can send the questions to Christian right away. But let me start out with one that I found super interesting right in the beginning from the chat, Christian. And that is the question. I mean, economy might be made up, but there's surely some sort of general laws about how people behave. And that's the question. I don't know the answer. And so, isn't then economics just trying to understand behavior and the behavioral patterns, right? So this is a typical idea of a market. Someone sells, someone buys. That's because how people are. And aren't there such rules, and thereby isn't economy then in some way predictable and in some way not just a construct? I think that's actually a quite interesting question because it probably relates to how we actually define an economy, what it is and what is not. Maybe you want to start out, and maybe in the looking at the time, brief answers so we can run through lots of questions in a short while.
Okay. And do you still allow me to answer to your personal situation, to your children and your household? Because I think that's so
Of course.
important.
Of
And then
course.
I proceed to the behavior question. For me, it's a kind of sign that those, I call them stages of economic activities, which are not the market, they're kind of demanding their visibility now. And that's so fitting for me. Our analysis and our proposal is to consider markets as just one stage of where economic activities happen, and other stages are public goods and common goods and households, and maybe a fifth one and a sixth one. But to be able to take all of them into your research perspective is a clear definition of what is the economy. And if you define the economy only as transactions conducted in markets against money, then you might only investigate markets. But if you define the economy more broadly, why not the satisfaction of human needs of all types? Then need satisfaction starts with a non-invasive birth, with breastfeeding, with childcare, with tenderness and intimacy in relationships and households. And so much of this starts in households, and they become so important. And all of this would have to be included in the whole picture of what the economy is. And then we can make meaningful choices, because you could decide that mothers should not breastfeed their children. It should be done by industrial food. This choice is one of the choices we have. But only if you first make a clear definition and then look at all stages of the economy, then maybe you are more prepared to decide that maybe it's nicer for the children to be breastfed. Just to give one example. And of course, in the GDP, then it becomes crystal clear. GDP is not able to include the satisfaction of needs which are met outside markets. But this creates a lot of happiness and satisfaction, but it's not considered in GDP. And this makes the market's only approach really flawed. As for human behavior, I was very surprised because I had studied sociology and I did not study economics. And I was always kind of surprised when economic students talked about Homo economicus, which is only rational and always rational, and and he's actually monodimensional. Whereas I had learned in my sociology studies that Max Weber, who was one of the predecessors of sociology, had already described the theory of social behavior with at least 4 options, and only one option is rational behavior, and the second one is affective behavior, and the third one is traditional behavior, and there is a fourth one, and the sum of it is actually human behavior is not predictive. Of course, there are patterns, some patterns, and there is a higher likeliness or a lower likeliness. But in the end, we are flexible, we are multidimensional, we are emotional, we like to be free. There is the fact that humans who have freedom of choice just behave today differently from yesterday because it's an expression of my freedom. So it's not predictable what I will do today because I will do the opposite of what I did yesterday. It's complex, it's systemic, it's irrational, and it's chaotic. And so it simply doesn't make any sense to make any assumption of how humans be, because this is the defense of new classical economists. They say it's just an assumption. Don't worry. It's not meant normative. It's just an assumption. And then I give back, hey guys, if it's just an assumption, why don't you assume something better? If it's just an assumption, if it's just one option out of many options, why don't you assume that humans are empathetic, that they are solidary, that they are cooperative, and that they are caring like mothers? Because this was actually these were 4 virtues of the ancient oikonomia. And it's more, the ancient word oikonomia stems from an even earlier word, which is oikonomos. And oikonomos was literally a housewife. So actually the word oikonomia stems from a woman who had 4 virtues, which were to be caring, to be cooperative, to be generous, and to be sufficient. And so if we assume anything about a Homo economicus, then it would be these 4 qualities. And what was defined as Homo economicus only, and that's very important, only in 1888, this is the first time when economic man as such, economic man was mentioned in scientific literature for the first time, only in 1888, 100 years after Adam Smith. And the Latin term Homo economicus only appeared in the beginning of the 20th century. And only then these very narrow assumptions of rationality and being egoistic were ascribed to that Homo economicus, which only appeared in the beginning of the 20th century. And only then economic models were built upon these assumptions. And that's just not useful. I would just give this image up. Actually, I would rename what we understand today by Homo economicus to Homo chematisticus. Then it's coherent, then it's fine, because a Homo chematisticus strives for money, is materialistic, is egoistic, and is rational only in the capitalistic sense. And then we free the word Homo economicus for either for nothing, because I think it would be better not to assume anything about humans, or if we want to associate any qualities to a Homo economicus, then I would get back to what the ancient Greeks were thinking about and were really meaning when they started to talk about oikonomia.
Christian, thank you so much for these elaborations. I have two more questions I think we should definitely try to address. Maybe we don't need that much time, or we need a lot of time. One of
Yeah.
them is how you think about the way that some of those externalities are trying to be included in models. For example, the idea of ecosystem services, and that you try to, just put a price on certain things that are outside the conventional models. Maybe you can share your thoughts on that. And the other, I think, is a great question, more practical question. Someone who works at a provincial parliament is interested in how you would actually organize the input of citizens as you have described. Because, of course, from an organizational perspective, it is sometimes difficult to organize good process, to get people involved in the right way. Maybe you have some thoughts on that, which is a bit more practical, but I would really love to hear your ideas on those too.
Yeah. Can you help me a little bit with the first one? What was I did not get it.
Yes, of course. The question was on your thoughts on, let's say, the attempts to include some of the externalized problems like ecosystem services into more standard neoclassical theory, because that's basically one of the ways you could do it. You could say, well, the model isn't wrong, but it's just doesn't include everything, so you add variables to the model and thereby.
Yes.
So what do you think about it?
Now I got it. Thank you, Philip, for helping me with understanding the question. I would offer three options to include these externalities. And are these just externalities? Why aren't they internal from the beginning? That would be my question. But I describe three pathways. First is accounting, second is reporting, and third is ecological human rights again. What's the difference? In accounting, we have the existing law to lay a financial balance sheet in every company. And financial balance sheet for today, they do not consider these externalities, the contribution to climate change, the violation of human rights, or the degradation of soil fertility. And the first idea is to give a price to all of these environmental damages or social externalities, and to make these economic activities more expensive, because you have to include them in your accounting, which is your profit and loss statement, and in your corporate balance. This is one option. And to stay as brief as I can, the big problem is what does it cost to heat up the global climate? And what does it cost to violate human rights? And what does it cost to lose the life of a human, or to extinguish a species? So it's very problematic, this approach, although I understand the logic. Common Goal balance sheet is reporting as a second step. And the second step is, well, we describe these damages, we describe these losses and externalities, and we qualify them. We don't give them a price tag, we qualify them in points, in common good points. And according to the common good points of a company, it pays more taxes or less taxes. It gets a public contract or not. It's still problematic, but it's by far less problematic, because you don't put a price to a fundamental value. The third one, which actually I like most, we truly start to manage efficiently scarce resources. But we're not talking about capital, financial capital, we're talking about nature. And nature is a scarce resource in the meaning that this planet has enough for the basic needs of 8 billion people, but it has not enough for the greed, not even of 20% of us, let alone for all of us. So we change the currency again. So not instead of points, we choose a physical currency. And the one I most like is global hectares. And there is a calculation that 8 billion people could consume kind of or use 1.7 global hectares. And if 8 billion people did, global ecosystems would remain stable. And our children, your children, our children and grandchildren would enjoy the same living rights and the same sound ecosystems than we have found. So I tend to the second and the third, and the first is just another option. True costs is an interesting debate, and true costs at the moment, I think it's quite popular in the Netherlands, is working with the first approach. It's trying to enlarge accounting and giving a price tag to as many externalities as possible. Second question, we are dealing with more and more municipalities, and to my big joy and pleasure, I learned today that the first Spanish municipality has commissioned such a process in which the citizens compose democratically a common good product. It's a small municipality in the south of Spain, but it's a fact. And the idea is a similar process of the citizen assemblies that are taking place in Germany and France now, and that took place in Ireland and were so successful that they swapped over to Germany and France and more countries. And in a nutshell, our idea is a little bit more complex, and I think it's 6 or 7 steps. In the first step, the process is designed by process moderators and the city council. Second, the whole population is informed. All households are informed by the process. Third step, a convention or a selection of 150 persons, or maybe 100, is selected randomly. That's, according to experience, the best procedure, and but in a representative way. So from all ages, from all genders, from all origins, and from all economic statuses and classes. And in the stage 4, they define the questions. So on which questions do we want to decide? In the stage 5, it's this stage of research. And research means they ask experts from all from the whole spectrum of opinions. So it can be as uncontroversial as possible, no problem. They listen to all of them. And at the same time, liquid democracy, which means the citizens who are not in the convention still can contribute with input, with proposals, with feedback, with criticism. And in this is the most important stage. They formulate alternative solutions. So to, let's say, 10 questions, and for every question, 5, 6, or 7 alternative solutions from all sectors of society, so that the neoliberals and the industrialists and the small and medium-sized enterprise and the scientists and the farmers and the women, they can make their proposal. But every sector has to provide an empathetic proposal, because if it's not empathetic and if it's not including the other sectors, it has no chance to win. And that's the beauty of it. The most empathetic proposal will be the winner, because at the end of the process, all proposals will be voted upon, not by the convention, but by the citizenry, by the people. And the proposal that meets the least resistance for every question will be the winner. And well, that's the end. And of course, this is just the end for the process in the city. And it's the end of the process if the question lies in the political competence of the city, of the region. If it doesn't, it's just a pre-exercise, and then the result has to be forwarded up to the level where the political competence lies. And there has to be held the final convention in many questions on the national level or even European level. I'm very much looking forward to a European-wide referenda of that nature one day, but probably we have to rehearse first in our local towns, in our regions, in our countries, before we scale it up to the European level. Although the European Citizen Initiative already exists, so there is a preliminary instrument already established at the European level. Just when a certain threshold is jumped over, 1 million signatures in 7 countries, it's up to the European Commission to admit or not that decision to a hearing in the Parliament, and that's really flawed. That's not worthy of a developed democracy. That's pre-democracy. A true democracy, which I consider a sovereign democracy, would be different after jumping over the threshold of 1 million signatures from 7 countries. A European-wide referendum is initiated, but not immediately, because it would just be one proposal. there would be a second stage of another year where other proposals have the same chance to be part of the voting. And for a second, a third, and a fourth and a fifth alternative, probably 100,000 signatures are enough, because not everybody will raise 1 million signatures. But then after 1 year, maybe we have 3 or 4 or 5 proposals, and then will be made, the referendum European-widely will be held with the procedure of systemic consensus. And our experience, it's empirical. Our experience is that people are by far more satisfied and less frustrated with the outcomes of systemic consensus than from decisions made by the principle of simple majority.
Thank you, Christian, again for this really great introduction to a very complex matter. I think everyone is also welcome to go a bit deeper in your writings, in which you have also touched on some of those ideas. So I think that's also something I highly recommend. I really like your example that you just gave with coming up with alternative options. Probably Brexit would have gone a different way if there would be more things on the table to actually agree or not to agree on, which is, as you already observed, sometimes the problem that we have yes and no questions, while they are of course much more complex. I found this highly interesting debate. Christian, we are already a bit over time that we originally asked you to speak. I want to again thank you a lot, but I have also David Humphreys, my co-chair of the conference, here to also say a couple of words of thanks. So David, can I give you the floor now and end this really nice, very informative evening?
Indeed. Thanks very much, Philip. Thank you for moderating this. And Christian, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. You've been very generous with your time today in giving 2 lectures with 2 very different formats, and they were both excellent. Thank you. There's so much I learned from this. I've taken so many notes, and I'd also like to thank those that have participated for the diversity and richness of questions and comments in the text chat. I think the students that have attended will take an awful lot from it. I fully agree with you when you said at the start of your presentation that there's not really any such thing as a completely value-free science. And it reminded me of Paul Steinberg's book, Who Rules the Earth? He argues that the distinction between the normative and the analytical in the sciences is very much a lazy distinction. We research medicine because we value human health. We research engineering because we want buildings that are safe to build and construct. And so I think you're absolutely right that, you know, the normative that underpins the economy is absolutely central to the problem of unsustainability. And I think one of the important things that I would take away from this is that the relationship between government and business is absolutely central, and the interest that business serves. Does it serve individual rights, individual interests of individual companies, or does it serve the collective good? And I think the challenge is how we can get from serving the individual to serving the collective. And your presentations today take us a long way down that road to thinking through these important challenges and questions. So thank you very, very much indeed. On behalf of the organisers and on behalf of everybody that's had the pleasure and privilege of seeing you speak today. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks again for inviting me, and have a great evening, and see you another time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christian. And
thank you, Christian.
Good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.